I did was realize that if you were 18 years of age in 1944, you're going to be about like 93 now. So 10 years from now, if they decide to do an 85th anniversary, I think there's probably not going to be any of those individuals that were sitting in front of Donald Trump there any longer. So in some respects, this great tradition that goes all the way back to Ronald Reagan, where he had so many sitting in front of him in front of D-Day, is kind of coming to an end because every single day we lose more and more of our World War II veterans.
Even in 5 years, which would be the 80th, the youngest of the World War II veterans will be nearly 100 years old. So, even traveling, even if they're still alive. But I did appreciate President Trump highlighting certain vets that were still alive, that were there.
Amazing.
And just the way that he honored them in the speech. Now, of course, these speeches are written by someone else, you could say, but his delivery was exquisite. And I thought filled with real appreciation and emotion.
Oh, I think so, too. And as I mentioned, Ronald Reagan, of course, that famous one on the 40th anniversary of D-Day, we gathered here on Freedom's altar on these shores, on these bluffs, on this day 75 years ago. 10,000 men shed their blood. This was some of the things that Donald Trump was talking about, but you go all the way back to the boys of Pont du Hoc and the men and those, just incredible messages that came from this. And so it's just an opportunity, number one, to remind ourselves of the battle against tyranny, the incredible stories that have surfaced. And as I shared even yesterday, those individuals that would like to know a little bit more about D-Day, even though there's some great pieces, and we even put up on the website yesterday, if you'd like to see it, some material from our friends at the Stream of kind of a video and a photo summary of what happened in D-Day. Still, most people think that the best movie recreation of those actions are in the first 15 minutes of Saving Private Ryan.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And it was. Really, that is so etched in my mind that I can't even forget it.
Yes.
And, it's important, I think, for us to look at those things and look at the sacrifice that was made. It was just trying to think of another movie. It was fairly recent, and I'll have to go look it up during the break. But, yeah, these are important reminders. And, I liked being able to look back and just in my heart with appreciation for those people and how they just went in droves and droves and droves, so many of them. And it was just their ethic. It was just their ethos of life to serve and to give their lives.
The speech that I was going to read from Ronald Reagan, which we won't probably, but I'll just mention, talks about them climbing the ropes, throwing these grappling hooks up there, climbing the ropes. And when one person would fall, the next one would go up. If a rope was cut, they would keep going up there and eventually put their daggers into the ground, which is why you have that image today of the dagger pointing up. But that was significant in terms of D-Day. But even yesterday, I spent a little bit of time talking about just as significant as Normandy was in Europe, the Battle of Midway was in the Pacific Theater. And I read a little bit more about this, got some material interesting enough from Richard Land that wrote a commentary about this, because you had just a complete destruction of a very significant amount of the Japanese fleet. And that happened 2 years before. So this time of June, whether it's June 1942 or June 1944, both of those seminal events turned the direction of the war. And there's another aspect of that I'm going to be talking about in my Sunday school class on this Sunday, and that is when you think back, we, in both cases, had the potential for incredible failure. When you look at D-Day, there were some individuals that landed on the wrong shore. There was a miscommunication. There were people that were dropped into the wrong places, the paratroopers. There were some that fell into a place that had been flooded by the Germans and drowned. There was just everything going against them in D-Day, and yet they were successful. Midway was actually a battle that developed because the Japanese were trying to completely destroy the rest of the Pacific Fleet. And fortunately, we understood that that was coming. And so as a result, within about 10 minutes, you began the sinking of 3 Japanese aircraft carriers. By the battle, when it was over, a 4th one. It so devastated Japan that it already started showing the direction of the war going the other way. And back to the key point that Richard Land made, and I think others have made, a lot of this may be due to a lot more than just coincidence or fortune or good luck, but maybe God's providence.
Perhaps.
And something to think about that in terms of the war.
And, there was a line out of the president's speech that he gave: the abundance of courage came from an abundance of faith. And it made me think about it kind of took me forward to the battles for religious liberty at our military, because, those people don't go to war and they don't fight wars without faith.
That's right.
And, it's impossible. And that was acknowledged back then. Now, we struggle to even be able to acknowledge that. And it's a good reminder that, our faith and really God's hand underlies all of these great battles and all of this courage that makes men do crazy things on behalf of their country.
Well, and as we read yesterday, the entire prayer by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which again was read by Donald Trump, but only because it had been done before. But just think about this. A Democrat president, somewhat of a liberal, obviously, has this prayer that if any president now, whether it's George W. Bush or Donald Trump, or whether
couldn't do it.
Couldn't even imagine doing that. So it tells us a lot about what has happened in this country, which is a good setup for our conversation we're going to have in just a minute as we talk about this whole issue of religious liberty. And we'll take a break. Penna Dexter with me, Kelly Shackelford joining us, and we'll continue right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
If I were to ask you which professions have high suicide rates, you would probably mention military veterans suffering from PTSD. In their latest report, the Centers for Disease Control have found that the suicide rate for young male military veterans is higher than previously thought, but they found that it is lower in some states than the suicide rate for farmers. The high suicide rate for farmers is only now just beginning to get media attention. Mike Rossman is a psychologist who has been studying this issue for decades and has an appreciation for the stresses on farmers since he is also an Iowa farmer. Writing in the journal Behavioral Healthcare, he reminds us that farming has always been a stressful occupation because many of the factors that affect agricultural production are largely beyond the control of the producers. This is borne out by the latest statistics from the CDC. If you focus on all the people working in agriculture, farmers, farm laborers, ranchers, fishers, and lumber harvesters, they take their lives at a rate higher than any other occupation. The suicide rate for agricultural workers in 17 states is nearly 5 times higher compared to that of the general population. The reasons for this are many. Farmers are often reluctant to seek help. Often their farms are far away from healthcare centers. Pesticide exposure can lead to depression. They are isolated, and the cost of feed and equipment continues to rise while the prices they receive for food and fiber remain stagnant. This is a healthcare crisis that deserves attention. Perhaps this is the first time you've even heard about the suicide rate of farmers. Making citizens and politicians aware of this crisis is the first step. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once Once again, by the way, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. It is our Friday weekend edition, and we certainly do welcome your phone calls, but if not, just sit back and listen. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford, and the first article we put up there had to do with a conversation that we actually started during this hour not years ago, but months ago, with Jonathan Saenz and others, what was happening in the San Antonio airport. But we also pointed out that it occurred to First Liberty, wait a minute, they receive federal funds, and maybe there could be an investigation. So this is a very good article at First Liberty telling us that the Federal Aviation Administration's going to investigate what's going on in San Antonio.
Yes, they are. They've opened a civil rights investigation, and they're very serious about it. And that's what we asked them to do. I mean, when we looked at this first, we thought, well, Chick-fil-A doesn't file lawsuits on this. They kind of let this happen to them, and which, maybe if you're Chick-fil-A, you're big, you can get away with that. But, I mean, I wish they would, just because there's a lot of other people that aren't as strong as they are that need the protection, because this is wrong. I mean, what they did in San Antonio is they were in an airport wing. They were taking Chick-fil-A out, not allowing them to be a part of this because Chick-fil-A did something? No, Chick-fil-A... Because, quote, they discriminated. Okay, well, what do you mean discriminate? You mean they're not serving sandwiches to people who, are gay or lesbian or bisexual or whatever? No, they serve everybody. Well, then why is it discrimination? Because the private owners of Chick-fil-A have a private foundation, and they have given to groups like, and these are the ones they mention, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and the Salvation Army.
Oh, boy.
And so, but just think about this. The government is going to they can come after your business if they find that the people who own the business are Christians, and in their private time, they give money to Christian causes. I mean, that's just so wrong on so many levels. And so we were like, well, we got to do something. And, we realized, hey, wait, this is a federal, this is an airport, so there's federal funding, and federal funding requires that you not discriminate on the basis of religion. So, and Elaine Chao, many people don't know this, she's not only, Senate Majority Leader McConnell's wife, but she is also a strong Christian, and obviously a solid conservative. She worked at the Heritage Foundation, et cetera. So we thought, well, let's say, hey, how can they be receiving money when they're doing this? And they've now opened an investigation, not only on San Antonio, but also on Buffalo, because Buffalo saw what they did in San Antonio, and they're like, well, we can discriminate against Chick-fil-A? And, this was going to go everywhere, right? All the liberal places would do this. Now, nobody wants to do this right now because the federal government is coming after you if you do.
So San Antonio, I mean, there was like an instance to draw on because they recently remodeled the airport and they got a lot of federal money to do so. And so it was a good sort of peg to be able to do that. And now also our Attorney General is going after them,
That's right. The Texas Attorney General saw this as well, and he said, I want to investigate as well. And he's now filed a lawsuit to make sure he gets the information about what they're doing.
So it was pretty funny because I was sitting in your chair for a couple of Fridays, and Jeremy Dyes was in, and Lathan Watts. And toward the end of the program, Jeremy sees an email with regard to a possible investigation by the FAA, and getting a smile on his face, knowing that it was actually perpetrated probably because of First Liberty's little note to them. And then by the next week, we could fully report on the fact that was happening.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, I talked to the chief of staff for the FAA chief of staff of Elaine Chao, and he said, look, our goal is not, just the San Antonio situation, but this needs to be stopped at every airport in the country. And they're making sure that there's a full civil rights investigation and that nobody will do this again because it's wrong.
Penna, one of the things we've noticed when we've talked with Kelly over the years is sometimes when they raise an issue, we expect that the administrator, the principal, the headmaster or the lawyer say, oh, wait a minute, I guess that was a mistake on our point. And what we find is, no, they just double down. And a good example of that is after that first vote, there was a second vote. And you would have thought at this point, cooler heads might have prevailed. And when they took a second vote, they just again agreed that they wanted to actually discriminate against Chick-fil-A because Chick-fil-A supposedly discriminates.
Yeah, well, let's give you another example of that today. We just find out today that Barronelle Stutzman, who
the
florist from Washington, who was told that she was sued and that she could lose everything, her home, her business, everything, because she wouldn't do a flower arrangement for a gay wedding.
Yeah.
And of course, it went through the Washington courts, and they said, yeah, just stick her with everything, right? And then it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they sent it down after the Jack Phillips case. Basically, Jack Phillips sending a lot of messages. You don't do this to people. Well, they just doubled down. The Washington Supreme Court just said, yep, we're sticking with it. No changes with us. So I'm sure Barronelle Stutzman now will be appealing to the Supreme Court. And it shows that just, the determination of the side that wants to destroy people's freedoms. And, it's, I wish I could remember the quote. There's a bishop who I just heard a quote from the other day that I thought was so good, but it essentially was saying evil is only for tolerance when it's in the minority.
Yeah.
And as soon as it gets in the majority, it's not for tolerance anymore. And that's what we're seeing. And it's just, this was supposed to be tolerance, right? Well, it's not anymore. It's, we don't even care what the law is. We don't care if the federal government comes down. We don't care if the Supreme Court says that this is unconstitutional. We are going to destroy you if you don't follow the beliefs we want you to have.
It's interesting that just this week, of course, we are celebrating or remembering D-Day.
Yes.
We're remembering people who had, if they weren't believers and that wasn't motivating their actions, they had a Christian ethos.
Right.
And there's so much hatred for that ethos, not just for Christianity, but also for the Christian ethic, the Christian ethos, which has basically built our country and caused it to be prosperous and caused it to be successful and a good nation. And there's so much hatred for it now. And so that's why, well, it's just a battle now between those who are motivated still by faith and by traditional good moral capitalist values.
Yeah.
And those who oppose that. And, it's really, the country and the culture is up for grabs right now. It kind of makes our show, Point of View, and all the work that First Liberty does even more important.
Well, one of the things in one of our briefs, in a case that when it wasn't ours, it was another brief filed to support us in a Supreme Court case. It was a bunch of generals.
Yes.
And these generals, these retired generals, were saying the main reason why, when we ask people why they join the service and what the main motivation is always, percentage-wise, is always their faith. It's always religion. And, I've been to Normandy and to Pont de Hoc, and I looked at that and I was like, how? This is like a suicide mission. This is crazy. And, I see the Rudder name, which is, of course, a hero that Texas A&M, you see, I think, Rudder Hall or Rudder Buildings or whatever. And I saw the plaque there. And you're like, how can you scale this wall with machine guns pouring down on you? And the other side is totally protected in a concrete bunker with a little slit that simply allows the guns to come out. You got no way to get them. You're defenseless. You're climbing up a cliff. And people are just being massacred all around you. I don't think there's any way that could be successful absent people of faith.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think it would happen. I don't think, there might be some, people who don't believe in God who, would give their lives and do that. But I don't think you would have enough. I don't think there's any way that happens. The storming of the beaches happens without what Penna was talking about, that Judeo-Christian ethic, that self-sacrifice, that willing to give yourself for freedom of others, just a faith in God and saying, I'm doing the right thing, I'm trusting in you as I'm doing this crazy thing right now to save millions and millions of lives.
Many people think that the best speech by Ronald Reagan was that 40th anniversary speech in which he talks about, there's one fell, another one just go up that rope, and then as they cut the rope, they just keep on going, and eventually there are daggers in there and able to finally get that particular piece of real estate. And again, if you want to understand more about that, read the speech by Ronald Reagan. Let's take a break, though. We have a lot more to cover. Penna, Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. And first time all three of us been together in a while, and we've got a lot to cover, and we'll do so right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again in studio with us today, Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. And one of the things that we love to do is interview John Stonestreet. He was supposed to be on with us Monday. We had to postpone that, but nevertheless, he has a new book out. But his commentary here, Religious Freedom in Scare Quotes, and has to do with some of the reaction to the Department of Health and Human Services announcing new rules regarding healthcare professionals, which I think is such a good idea because of conscience protection. If indeed you have a conscience concern about abortion, sterilization, assisted suicide, or whatever. But it is amazing to me that as people have been writing about this, Penna, you see they refer to it as the religious freedom power play. We just can't seem to get away from this. Anytime we talk about freedom of religion or religious liberty, our progressive friends out there just simply say this is just a ploy so that we can prosecute individuals and so that we can discriminate against individuals. And that's not the point at all, is it?
You know, over time, I think just the definition of religious freedom just seems to have changed for some reason. And it's so interesting to me because of this whole idea of conscience and, you know, what you just morally can't do. You're forced to do under some of this Obamacare type regulation. And this was just a relief from that. And, you know, just yesterday, you know, under the pressure from the Democrats pro-abortion wing, the really radical wing, Joe Biden had to take his stance, which was in support of the Hyde Amendment, which it was a conscience protection for the American people, not have to pay for the killing of babies. Okay, it was common sense, supported really with bipartisan support over the decades. But now the one candidate who is considered to be, quote unquote, in the middle and somewhat moderate, I mean, he really was forced, I think, by the party to toe the Democrat line. And he had to make it. I mean, on Wednesday, he supported the Hyde Amendment. On Thursday, he made a declaration that he now is against the Hyde Amendment, that, you know, there's inequality for these women. They don't get the quote unquote health care they should get, which is abortion. And so, you know, I just think that's a prime example of the way the definition of religious freedom and conscience has changed over the years.
Well, and again, you talk about pressure. I mean, this was like a light switch. Sometimes they say, well, I'm evolving on this. But like you said, one of his staffers is defending his stance on the Hyde Amendment. The next day he says, no, I'm against the Hyde Amendment. I mean, you just couldn't have had a quicker light switch. But what about this, Kelly, this idea that this is all a religious freedom power play? What in the world's going on?
Well, what you see from the left is they just don't even believe in religious freedom. Everything is some sort of gimmick or power play because they just don't have any respect or appreciation for religious freedom. And so every time somebody has a genuine religious freedom defense, they say, oh, that's just an excuse. It's just a cover-up. It's just a whatever. No, it's religious freedom. It's somebody that actually has beliefs, and we actually founded this country so that people could have different religious beliefs than the government. And it's sad, but I mean, what it shows is that there is a significant, and not a majority certainly, but there's a significant percentage of people who don't believe in religious freedom. I mean, they don't understand that they don't believe in it. They think they do. They just think, well, not in this case.
Yeah.
But that's the whole point of religious freedom is whatever's popular or whatever is being forced. You don't have religious freedom unless you can sort of be in the minority and disagree and follow your faith in a way that's different from other people. And they think that it should fall at that point. So they don't believe in religious freedom. I do think the Biden thing is a great example. Some of this comes out of his faith. And we've now seen this a couple of times where he's come out. The liberal base has said that's not acceptable. And within a few days, he's turned. And I think that's what we're going to continue to see. And I think politically they're harming him because he's kind of running as this centrist. But I think as you watch this happen, if this continues to happen, and I think it will, I think they're gonna destroy his candidacy, because whether you are liberal or conservative, you're trying to elect a leader, not somebody who basically will do whatever they're told.
Yeah.
And
Finger in the wind. Yeah.
And so I just think he's looking feckless. He's looking more and more feckless. He's looking more and more like he has no beliefs or no rudder. And I don't think the American people will end up voting for that if this continues to happen.
When he had to be elected to the U.S. Senate from Delaware, up in New England, there are a lot of Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are real deep religious Catholics, and then there's just the cultural Catholicism that's up there that probably is the kind that he practiced. And but now, it's the party, it's the left and their control of the Democrat Party and of the sort of the narrative there. And so because his faith isn't deep and strong, he can throw that out and I don't know how hard or easy it is for him to do it in his heart to kind of turn around on those things. But it is embarrassing, Kelly. It does show him to be, I think, not the kind of leader that we need. I mean, say what you will about Trump, but we've seen a person who has not really cared what people thought, and he's gone ahead and kept campaign promises and not wavered on them. And so, that's what we're starting to get used to as a nation.
Yeah, I think
he looks the opposite.
He has a lot of great numbers now, and et cetera, because he's kind of been disappearing and just allowing I'm the one that can beat Trump and all this.
Not showing up in California at the convention.
Avoiding certain things, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But now he's got the plagiarism issue that popped up again, which is really bad because it played right into what he did before when he copied the speech in the earlier election where he that knocked him out of the race.
Yeah, Neil Kinnock.
Yep. And then to copy, verbatim, the Green New Deal type stuff in his campaign when before he was not going to do that too.
Right.
So you have him caving and plagiarizing at the same time. But this, I think on the abortion issue especially, people tend to have their beliefs on that. The idea that you can be turned in 24 hours on that position, really says you just don't have a spine.
Yeah.
And you don't have really beliefs, that you're just for sale. And I think, so again, I think the Democrat base is hurting the thing that he had that they thought at least would be in his favor, which was he's more of a moderate. He'll be seen as somebody who can beat Trump. All these socialists they have running can't. But now they're really destroying their own guy who has the best chance, I think, especially if you see more of this.
Meanwhile, Trump gives a speech over in Europe, and it's the best. The liberals even say it's the best speech he's ever given.
It's just amazing. Just before we take a break, let's talk about this idea, because you said it's the left. One of the things Dennis Prager said on this program, and I've mentioned it as well, the difference between liberalism and the left. Let's take a liberal that's been on the program with us before, Alan Dershowitz. I think he would say, I recognize religious liberty. I may not agree with you, but you have the right to exercise your religious liberty. And the typical conservative, the typical liberal would say, yes, there's a place in our public policy for religious liberty. The left says you don't have a right to those kinds of ideas. The liberal, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, heard just the other day the speech where we are fighting to make America safe for what? Christianity, make safe for the Christian world. You can't imagine a leftist on campus to say that today, right?
No. And again, I think a lot of them would say they believe in religious freedom.
Yeah.
But what they mean is, as long as whatever your religion is not something that I disagree with.
Right.
And so they don't even understand, well, then it doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's not the way it works.
And they used to say, well, as long as it's in the church or the synagogue, but you found out that, no, you can't even use your religion there, right?
No, we've got cases on both. So yeah, it's a different time. And I said this a few years ago in a number of speeches where I said, people are going to think I'm stretching this, but we are literally in a battle. In the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to decide whether we keep religious freedom or not. We are making that decision because I had already seen the law review articles, the things coming out that that, come before this type of talk. But there are people who don't want religious freedom because it gets in the way of their issues.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ever lose it on one issue, you've lost it, because whatever's popular next time wins too. And so we are in a conversation, whether people realize it or not, about whether we will keep religious freedom.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll have a few other things to say about that. But next hour, we're going to get into some other issues that we've posted here. Of course, we've referred to the speech by Donald Trump. Also, this issue of praying for the president. We did talk about that on Tuesday, but I just want to hear everybody's comment around the table on that. Got the issue of immigration and a variety of other topics on the table, so we'll have a lot to cover. We'll do all that coming up right after this.
In a slow moment at Starbucks, one of my favorite young baristas chatted about how she and her boyfriend divide the cooking duties. She also mentioned they recently moved here from halfway across the country. Her revelations made me think about how much has changed due to the sexual revolution. Activities and events that used to take place within marriage now often happen outside of it. In addition to sex and intimacy, unmarried couples share residences, cooking, bill paying, childbirth and child rearing, and really life and career planning. And I wondered if this lovely barista would like to be married to this boyfriend of a few years. Maybe not, but her situation is illustrative of a sea change in the culture. University of Texas sociologist Mark Regnerus writes of this phenomenon in Cheap Sex, The Transformation of Men, Marriage, and Monogamy. He conducted over 100 interviews and drew on data from his survey of over 15,000 Americans to back up what we all know. Cheap sex is flooding the market in sex and relationships, and it's resulting in a disturbing decline in the marriage rate. His extensive research has shown that among Americans ages 24 to 32, casual sex is the norm, and waiting until marriage is rare. Cheap sex has become a presumption widely perceived as natural and commonsensical, he writes. The development and widespread use of the birth control pills serve to separate sex from childbearing. A weaker tie between sex and pregnancy detracts from the argument that marriage is necessary for sex. Thus, women lose some of their gatekeeping power. No-string sex might be fun for men, but as Dr. Regnerus points out, it does little to encourage them toward those historic institutions, a settled job, and marriage that created opportunity for them and their families. Mark Regnerus's book makes a good case that cheap sex is actually very expensive for women, men, and the society. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and then we're going to, of course, have our national program begin at 1 o'clock. But I thought while we have Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford, Kelly, I might just mention that one of the other things that we encourage people to do is go to your website, and as they go there, they're going to find the biggest 30, and you've got a number of things that in terms of impact, and we've mentioned, of course, one of those, and that's the Chick-fil-A investigation, but you have some others there as well. We've talked about Airmont, and we've talked about a couple of other very key issues that are being watched right now and are, again, some of those ongoing battles for religious liberty. Can you kind of give us an overview real quick?
Yeah, we try to pick the thing. We had different staffers pick what they thought was the most significant, thing this year, and like incident or time or something they remember. And So, for instance, I think Chelsea mentioned being in the court when we were arguing the Bladensburg cross case, the American Legion case, and the other side got up and argued that there was no protection for religious expression in any sort of government buildings or government property. And right as he said that, you saw Breyer looking up at the frieze of Moses with the Ten Commandments. And that was her memory.
That was a good one, yes.
Yeah, but
and
there
was
were
impact number 3 in case people want to read
that's
that.
right. And
We have a link to it.
Lathan's was, and it's pretty powerful. I mean, most people don't even know about it, but the church we're representing, Light of the World Church in Nebraska, where they're just, it's incredible. This church is just booming. It's really reaching people, but it's a city that doesn't want them to exist. And so they're being incredibly harassed, and it got so bad that literally, I mean, bricks were being thrown at people on their way out of church. And, there's one that hit a car, that there were children there. And that was Lathan's. We had to go out, hold a press conference, get the law enforcement involved and everything else. And for Lathan, that was the thing. It was like, we're talking, you don't usually think about violence and religious freedom in this country. And this was happening in this country. So that was his. So everybody had their kind of, what's the moment that you think of the most? And so it's something people can look at if they go to First
Do you have
Liberty.
one?
Mine has to be the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if you the memory the most is the one, I think we might even still have it on our website at the front, the picture.
Yes.
But to me, it's standing out in front of the Supreme Court with hundreds of microphones in front of you, and behind me are all these incredible veterans with their hats that specifically are saying, one was from Ireland, one was the different theaters in which they fought.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And not only was all the American Legion and all those people, the joke, the guys with the funny hats, but Mary McQuay was right next to me too. This little lady with the red hat.
Right.
She was a descendant of one of the 49 men on that memorial who had died in World War I. So to me, that picture, you've got media, you've got Supreme Court in the background, you've got all these American Legion veterans, and you've got a descendant of somebody on the memorial. That's probably the one that sticks out. And again, we have a picture of that on the website. Of course, now we're waiting on that decision.
Yes.
I would encourage, I know we'll probably do this
when
we get on the national show, but I would encourage everybody listening to really be praying about this. This is going to come down in the next 2 weeks, 2 to 2.5 weeks.
Isn't that amazing?
And
we finally come to that discovery.
And it could very easily, change religious freedom. And if I had to guess, I'd say it is, in a way where every American alive will have more religious freedom than they've ever had in this country. All the attacks against religious symbols, veterans memorials, nativity scenes, crosses would be over in this country. So it's very significant what could happen, and in fact I think will happen, but you just don't know. And so people really need to be praying, because I'm sure there's all kinds of spiritual warfare going on with the justices.
So is it still possible for them to be changing
absolutely
their tune on things?
Most people, nobody knows for sure, but that is the word at what happened on that first Obamacare decision. There was a majority going the other way, and in the last week or so, you had, again, this is the rumor, the word, the whatever, you had Chief Justice Roberts flipping and going to the other side. So here we are a couple of weeks out. Same thing could happen. And just really pray that we get a strong decision that really changes away from this bad case called Lemon in the past, and really moves us to a new future in this country that would be really, really good for religious freedom.
So again, just some matter for prayer. And let me encourage you that as we come to the end of June to support First Liberty, but also one of the themes we've had here, Penna, is the idea of mourning in America. And I tried that out on Gary Bauer the other day because I think he probably would know where that came from.
Since he worked in the Reagan administration.
Yes, and we talked about the fact that, I'll be the first to admit that there are real differences between the personality of Donald Trump and the personality of Ronald Reagan. But there are some similarities, and that is those of us old enough around the table remember what it was like as you came into the early 1980s with inflation and an economy that was just a mess, and a decision by individuals which were related to Ronald Reagan, like Jack Kemp and others, to reduce the tax rate, to reduce regulations in the booming economy, and also to put people on the court like Antonin Scalia. And I said, if that doesn't sound like what's been transpiring over the last couple of weeks and months and last 2 years almost, there is some real similarity. And then Gary jumped in and said, I might mention something else, and that is I'll be the first to admit that Donald Trump is not Ronald Reagan, but this is not the 1980s. Just a couple of days ago, we were talking about Van Taylor. There's a front page article in the Dallas Morning News saying Van Taylor, bipartisan. Well, that wouldn't have been news back in the 1980s, but now
it's a shock
everybody's
now.
in tribes, and the fact that he actually talks to Democrats is a big issue. He says, the person we needed now is somebody more like Donald Trump. But the point I'm making is that we think that this is a time, because of some of these successes, that First Liberty and Point of View deserve your financial support, because this is a time when, if you go back 2.5 years ago, Kelly was planning on what it was going to be like under a Hillary Clinton administration and really having to fight for some of these. He's one step away from changing the lemon test and maybe changing some other things. I mean, this is an exciting time to be alive.
It is. And, when you think about the necessity for Point of View to continue, I mean, we've been around for decades, but right now, the consensus in the country is gone. Any Christian consensus we had 10, 20 years ago is gone. And, we have the sanctity of human life under severe attack. So it's something we have to talk about. Religious liberty, as Kelly just said, some people say they're for it, but they really don't know what it is, and they're not protecting it. So religious liberty is on the bubble there. And then, we have, yes, Morning in America, we've got a great economy, but we've got all these people running on one side that want to reverse everything that's given us the great economy. So, it's a pivotal moment. I mean, I'm thinking almost probably more than ever in my lifetime, which is a pretty long life. So.
Well, nothing else. Again, one of the reasons we wanted to mention that is there's a place for you to find out more about First Liberty. And I hope that as you support them, you also consider supporting us. And click on that button that says donate, and maybe even join the Truth Team by clicking on the banner that says help restore the culture. So that's our first hour. When we come back, we have a lot to cover. We've got 2 hours to cover a lot of very important issues in the news, and we will do so right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. It's been a while since all three of us have been in the same room, and it is going to be a great 2 hours as we look at a number of different issues. This has sort of been a week of anniversaries. Of course, yesterday was the 75th anniversary of D-Day, June 6, 1944. But we also yesterday spent some time talking with Gordon Chang in studio, because it was also the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, which took place earlier in the week, June 4th, 1989. And you can add to that the conversation we had with David Rubin about Israel's Six-Day War that took place in June 5 through 10 in 1967. So lots of anniversaries. And Penna, Dexter, if nothing else, we have posted some material about the fact that people are saying that the speech by Donald Trump may be the best one he's ever given.
Yes, even people on the left have been saying that. Different members of the media who have been watching him and critiquing him. So that's interesting. You know, I wanted to go back to the one anniversary you mentioned, Tiananmen Square, because,
Yes.
you know, we always get a history lesson every year when we talk about D-Day or even on Memorial Day, these different times. But now there's a whole contingent of voters who weren't alive during Tiananmen Square. And, you know, we're also debating socialism and, you know, adopting it in this country. Like, some people think it's so romantic and great. And, you know, you only have to look at what happened there and how, you know, a government killing its own people and the blood and the lack of freedom on the part of young students who are standing up for freedom mowed down. And, you know, you start to see what the fruits of that ideology are. And so it's important to remind the society and the culture of that.
And if you need a reminder, just look at what Xi Jinping is doing right now, and that is they have social media that you're supposed to have on your smartphone, a Xi app, so that you spend a half an hour each day learning about that. There are facial recognition cameras that were put in some of the churches still standing, although many of them have been torn down. Mm-hmm. And part of it is they recognize they're losing control, because as Gordon Chang pointed out yesterday, the Chinese Communist Party may be 80 million people. That's an inflated number, and not necessarily very engaged or encouraged as they were in the past. You have easily more than 100 million Christians in China, and the estimates are you could have 250 to 230 million to 250 million by 2030. You can kind of see the direction that's going, and so the repression taking place right now in China, not to mention what you find in North Korea and other places. Just a reminder, Kelly, we always like to talk about liberty, because there are a lot of places in the world where we don't enjoy the liberty we have right here.
And we take for granted. I think that's why yesterday was such an important day. Not just that, you know, the president gave what everybody says is maybe the best speech he's ever given, but it reminds us the cost that, you know, our freedom isn't free. And anybody who's been to Normandy, who's looked at that,
And you have. Yeah.
I have. I mean, the whole thing is just amazing. You sit there and, I mean, it's just like a suicide mission. You know, you're like, who came up with this idea? You know, this was crazy. And you look at Pont de Hoc, where, I mean, it's completely insane. I mean, the idea, we're going to send people running across the beach. You know, meanwhile, way above them is a bunker with concrete, with little bitty slits, with these massive guns that can just shoot, tons of bullets left and right constantly. You're gonna come in on the water where they can mow you down. Then you're gonna stand up on the beach where they can mow you down, where they did mow most people down. Then you're gonna come up to a cliff where you're gonna go straight up where they can mow you down. And somehow you think you're getting inside the concrete bunker and taking this place over. You look at it and you just think, this was beyond even belief. But the courage, the sacrifice, I mean, you have to know
yes.
The likelihood is I will die. Most of us will die.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is somebody's going to get through. That's what they did for liberty. And I think it's a good reminder. And just like Tiananmen Square, I think everybody who was alive then remembers that tank with the student standing in front of it.
Tank man, yes.
And everybody needs to know. We need to remember. Scripture has a lot about remembering. The Israelites remembering what God has done, and we need to remember that, because just like Penna was saying, the socialist kind of mindset doesn't remember at all. There's no cost for that. The idea that we're just going to mess things up, we're going to create chaos, we're going to have the government come in and be the solution, and everybody's just going to be great. No, you're going to be like China. You're going to be like Hitler. You're going to be in a place where people are then going to have to actually give their lives to ever get liberty back for other people.
And again, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, the more control the left gets, the more they also rewrite history.
Yes.
And, if they're successful in doing that, if we're not able to preserve our history and world history, what happens in other cultures, then, we don't have anything to stand on. So that's another part of it. Their fingers get into all different parts of the culture, and that's where we have to stand, I think, in our media, in our universities, in our elementary schools, where, they change what truth is, even to the degree of changing what biologically you are, what gender you are. So, it's just important to always speak the truth and to stand on it, not to waver.
And this idea of educating them, people in China don't know about Tiananmen Square. Where numbers like the number 4, number 8, and 9 can't even be used in a text message. And one of the things I read yesterday was from a woman who was in China at the time that took place, and only when she got to the United States found out what happened in Tiananmen Square. So then when she went back, she went to 5 major universities in Beijing and asked the students, they would show the picture of the tank man, for example, the one standing in front of the tank. Only 15 out of 100 knew what that was at all. Most of them said, well, is this like from Kosovo? Is this from Korea? They know nothing about that. And so, as you said just a minute ago, Penna, even though we look at the censorship that takes place in China, we have to recognize the revising of history and the rewriting of history and the changing of history here. And that's why I think another aspect of what we try to do at Point of View is educate people about some of the things that have happened in the past that we can learn from.
Yep. I think I got 2 big thoughts, but we only have a minute before the break, so I can't go there. But I do want to, when we get back, I want to share something that's very encouraging about what's happening now in the United States for the future, and what is very dangerous, sort of a positive and a negative that happened this week as well. So there's some great things happening for the future of freedom in America, but there are also some very dangerous things that we have to make sure that we take care of, or we'll regret it. We'll be like China.
Well, Kelly set us up. We're all going to be waiting to hear what that is right after the break. And so that is the case. But again, this has been just a week of anniversaries, whether it's the Battle of Midway in 1942, D-Day in 1944, or, of course, as we mentioned, Tiananmen Square in 1989. And, of course, we also talked about the Israel Six-Day War in 1967. By the way, a lot of those seem to show God's providence. We may come back to that a little bit later, but let's hear from Kelly Shackelford right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, if I were to ask you which professions have high suicide rates, you would probably mention military veterans suffering from PTSD. In their latest report, the Centers for Disease Control have found that the suicide rate for young male military veterans is higher than previously thought, but they found that it is lower in some states than the suicide rate for farmers. The high suicide rate for farmers is only now just beginning to get media attention. Mike Rossman is a psychologist who has been studying this issue for decades and has an appreciation for the stresses on farmers since he is also an Iowa farmer. Writing in the journal Behavioral Healthcare, he reminds us that farming has always been a stressful occupation because many of the factors that affect agricultural production are largely beyond the control of the producers. This is borne out by the latest statistics from the CDC. If you focus on all the people working in agriculture, farmers, farm laborers, ranchers, fishers, and lumber harvesters, they take their lives at a rate higher than any other occupation. The suicide rate for agricultural workers in 17 states is nearly 5 times higher compared to that of the general population. The reasons for this are many. Farmers are often reluctant to seek help. Often their farms are far away from healthcare centers. Pesticide exposure can lead to depression. They are isolated, and the cost of feed and equipment continues to rise while the prices they receive for food and fiber remain stagnant. This is a healthcare crisis that deserves attention. Perhaps this is the first time you've even heard about the suicide rate of farmers. Making citizens and politicians aware of this crisis is the first step. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Penna, Dexter, Kelly Shackelford in studio with us today. It is our weekend edition. If you'd like to join us, we already have one call coming in, and we may get some more in a little bit later. You are welcome to do so, 1-800-351-1212. But, Kelly, you had kind of a positive and a negative, and again, the breaks wait for no one, so now we have a chance to hear what you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, when we look at freedom and we look at China and we look at these other places where people, a lot of people don't, we need to be reminded the cost. The great news in America is I think we are on the precipice of expanding religious freedom in a way that nobody alive has experienced, and that is that there's some bad cases that have been out there since essentially the 60s and the 70s and thereafter that have really crippled religious freedom protections in the United States. And a lot of people don't realize that, but I mean that because that's what they've lived with. Well, we're on the cusp of changing that, and one of which is I'd encourage people to pray for the Bladensburg Cross case. The official name is the American Legion versus the American Humanist Association. This is the Bladensburg Cross that was put up 100 years ago by mothers who lost their sons in World War I. And the American Humanists have filed a lawsuit now after almost 100 years saying it has to be torn down because it's a cross, even though it's a veterans memorial. And that's an important case in and of itself. But what's being argued in this case is the court is being asked to get rid of the Lemon case, which is 50 years old, that has created all these hostile attacks to religion. And like the government has to be hostile to religion, which is something the founders never would have agreed with. So pray about that, because that decision will probably be coming down in the next 2 weeks, and it could be huge for what it means for the future of our country. And there's other things I won't go into depth right now that are happening in the religious freedom arena that are all so encouraging that everybody who's in this area knows major tectonic shifts are occurring. So that is really good news. I think we are going to everybody alive in the United States is going to have more religious freedom than they've ever had. That really bodes well for the future. Even if the hostility increases, the protection for people to speak the truth is increasing at the same time. The negative this week, I would say, for this issue of freedom is what happened with YouTube. And that is that you had some comedians, Steven Crowder and some others, who basically they announced that they were going to, at first they said that even if they disagree with people's views, they still can have their things on. And then they got pressure, and all of a sudden they said they're going to start demonetizing all these people. And they specifically included sexual orientation, gender identity language in their terms of what would be disqualifying.
Wow.
And so that would mean that everybody who doesn't agree with sexual orientation, gender identity, the approach now, they would be demonetized. I mean, we're talking about, YouTube, that's all of those would be conservative groups, more traditional Christian groups. And so that's the danger is what's happening with YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and Google is we're beginning to have all of our information come through these few sources, and they are all engaging in discrimination. And that's really dangerous. And so I think what's going to happen soon is people are going to rise up, because I'm seeing it already, and say, look, there's this thing in the law that the Congress provided to you where you can't be sued. And it's an exemption. It's called Section 230. And this says because you're just a platform and you're not engaged in content, you don't get treated like the Washington Post or the New York Times, right? Now, if the New York Times, if I said Kerby is, and I lied about you, Kerby, you could not only sue me, you could sue
the paper.
The
for
paper,
running it. Yeah,
right. You can't do that to Facebook or Twitter or Google or any of these people because they've got this exemption.
So they sort of have it both ways right now.
Right now they're changing content, so that exemption should be taken away.
Right.
And boy, you talk about something that'll upend their world, that will. And so I think when we get to that point, I think they're going to realize we've got to stop this. I might be wrong, but at least I think that's the way. I mean, they are so powerful. The only way to bring them to bear is to take this exemption away or have the threat of taking the exemption away, because what's happening right now is really scary. We're becoming, just like most people in China don't know about Tiananmen Square, if 3 or 4 sources and they're all liberal from, Silicon Valley, are controlling all of our information, we're going to be like China because we're only going to get to see what they allow us to see.
So if, Facebook or whatever platform disallows really awful, violent suicides on Facebook, things like that. So, and a lot of times they use the definition hate.
Right.
And so under that definition of hate, according to the left, is also people who don't agree with the SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity agenda, or don't agree with allowing the sexual revolution to trump religious liberty. So hate is all of the above.
Right.
They're going to have to figure out what kind of hate they're going to allow and what they aren't going to allow.
Exactly. And I think that, they're going to have to really pull things back, or they're going to have to lose their exemption. Now they're going to be responsible for what everybody says on their platform. You can imagine what that means. So they really do. They have to pick or choose. Either they're in the content business or they're not. And so, I think they can have it both ways, which they are right now. But I think that's going to come to an end because I think America's not going to allow this. I hope. If we do, we're going to end up with the very situation we were talking about in China, where most people don't even know what Tiananmen Square is, because they weren't allowed to see the information. Because my first thought when you just mentioned that is, well, can't they just the internet? It's all available. It's all being blocked by
up.
China.
Yeah, that's right. We
so
talked about that yesterday.
They can't see it. So.
Yeah. And the willingness on the part of these social media organizations to then cooperate with China in that regard, and which, again, was our conversation yesterday. But, again, when we've had some of the testimony, you can remember Ted Cruz, for example, said, we don't want to regulate you, but let's just be honest. You are more of a monopoly than when Standard Oil was broken up. You're more of a monopoly than when AT&T was broken up. So recognize that you, as you said, can't have it both ways. Either you're a public forum like a public park where people can stand and say anything they want in a park, or else you're an editorial page like the New York Times or the Washington Post. And they're really having a chance to play it both ways, but that's not going to continue.
No, and I think that the problem has been that many conservatives are like, well, we don't want to regulate like a monopoly because now we have the government regulating and we're private businesses. We're not real favorable to that. What I'm talking about is I think the thing that unites everybody, which is we're not saying the government regulates anything. Right now, the government is giving them a subsidy.
Right.
The government is subsidizing Yahoo and Twitter and YouTube and and Google, and they're saying we're giving you a protection that nobody else gets, and so you to take it away. If either that or you got to get out of the content business. Again, criminal speech, things like that. Obviously, those are things, but not what we're now to YouTube, including, sexual orientation, gender identity, transgenderism type thing, in whether they demonetize your account. That's really creepy. I mean, we're going to some other country, not the United States of America, where there's freedom of expression when we get into that kind of a world.
Well, and again, we need to have some people speak up about free speech, just like you've been speaking out about religious liberty. So let's take a break. We have quite a number of calls, so let me take some of those when we come back from the break. Some of you want to talk about Tiananmen Square. We've put that on the table. Also, the whole issue of social media. I see at least a call on that. And then when we come back, I do want to maybe get some comments from the two of you, since earlier in the week we did talk about whether or not we could pray for the president. I did not know that was going to be that controversial. Of course, we've appreciated the work of David Platt, and I've even had a chance in the past, long time ago, to actually preach at McLean Bible Church. But little did he know that when he said, let me pray for the president, that there would be a pushback to praying for the president. But we'll get your comments about that. We also heard Gary Bauer earlier in the week talk about this. But if you'd like to join us, we do have some calls, which we'll get to after the break. 1-800-351-1212. Also posted a couple of very good articles. And before we're done here today, if you would like to be praying for First Liberty in the case that we talked about, we have that link on the website. Matter of fact, as you click on picture of Kelly Shackelford, it takes you to the biggest 30, and we'll talk about what that means a little bit later. And, of course, we have Penna Dexter's commentary today, which you'll hear, and so we've just got so many things to cover. We'll do all of that right after these important messages.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. Let's head out to Nevada first. Whitey, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes, yesterday was a very good program. I didn't want to call because Mr. Gordon Chang has so much information. I think you guys got to bring him back someday soon. Do you know that the Statue of Liberty, the replica of Statue of Liberty was in Tiananmen Square?
Yes, and they were reading the Declaration of Independence, and that's what
I didn't know that.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then another thing about the gun, if these Chinese people have guns, do you think this military is going to just attack them like that? They'll think twice.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of that. Again, we have focused on Tiananmen Square. We may come back to this as well. Gordon Chang was on yesterday, and of course, you've seen him on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and others, and he was in town. And I want to thank Debbie Georgiadis for making that possible. He's connected up right now with an event that is being done by the Center for Security Policy. Frank Gaffney, you guys know him. Mm-hmm. And Gordon Chang brought a lot to the table. So if I could give you a little promo, that was in the second hour, the 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock hour Central or 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock hour Eastern time zone. And I would really encourage you to go back and listen to that. You'll learn a lot about what's happening in China. And Kelly, just a reminder of what happens in a culture where this technology that they have, facial recognition technology and being able to track people in social media, is in the hands of totalitarians.
It's scary. It really is. And it's why I think, normally what's hard these days is you can't get anything done legislatively because the liberals and conservatives, so disagree with each other. But when it comes to this technology, the Google, the Facebook, all that controlling everything, you've got the liberals are very concerned about the privacy violations. And the conservatives are concerned that they're all being censored. So you've got a combination where really both sides want something done about the fact that these technology companies are controlling all of our information right now.
Let me just mention that this booklet that I wrote a while back on privacy and surveillance is available to you. And I'm writing the one on social media. And, of course, you've already got a pretty good idea, an advance notice from Kelly about what that's going to be addressing. And those are really important issues, aren't they, Penna?
It occurs to me, social media was sort of the answer, and the internet, to the monopoly on news that the major television media, newspaper media had in this country. It was a big problem. And then we thought, we're free now. We can have all these sources. And now the control is coming in through another direction. And when it's relatively new like it is, it's the time to figure out how it has to move forward. And so, Congress having hearings and both sides, as Kelly just mentioned, getting to air their views on it's timely. It needs to be done now.
Well, one of the callers wants to address that issue, so let's head out to the state of Maine. Bob, I think you want to talk about this issue of social media and government control. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, a couple of quick things. I think some of this nonsense is criminal, and they should be arrested. As simple as that to me. But anyway, beyond that, I was going to say that even if the Johnson Amendment is removed, I think some of our churches and pastors are so co-opted by the culture that they won't speak out even if they get the go-ahead.
Let's talk about the Johnson Amendment. That was something that was slipped in really just to try to prevent some of the anti-communists for speaking against Lyndon Johnson. But it's been used as an excuse, Kelly, as you well know, to say, well, as a pastor, I really can't address any of these political issues. And yet, really, there is, as we've pointed out before, and you can go to your website, the resource section, to say that really pastors and churches have a tremendous amount of freedom, don't they?
They do. And the Johnson Amendment is really kind of a boogeyman that doesn't really exist in reality. The thing that the Johnson Amendment would prohibit is a 501c3 entity. The pastor can do whatever they want, but right. The 501c3 entity can't endorse one candidate over another and can't give money to one candidate over another. I don't know any churches who want to say First Baptist Church of, whatever endorses candidate A, or that says, hey, we're going to open our coffers to one of these political candidates. So the stuff that churches would do, registering people to vote, providing nonpartisan voters guides. I mean, even inviting the candidates to speak, and if one of them comes, you've done your duty. If you invited all of them, speaking from your own pulpit about the issues and what the Bible says about those, and what positions you should be voting for. All that is fine, and there's no question. So there's a lot of this is, as the caller was saying too, even if you took the Johnson amendment away, which you have right now, President Trump, through executive order, has basically told the IRS, do not enforce this because this is wrong. So right now there is nothing, but I think it's more than that. It's unfortunately some of the pastors aren't willing to speak out, and because they're going to ruffle some feathers if they do.
I think it's funny. Christians are critiqued in the sense religious freedom put in scare quotes we talked about earlier. So all these issues that are kind of moral become religious. But then the pastors say, well, I can't speak about this biblical issue because it's too political. So some of these issues come off the table because the church is so scared by the Johnson Amendment and that agenda that they won't speak about issues that are in politics, but they're also biblical. And yet the world, the left and the culture, anything that we stand for, the sanctity of human life, that's religious, and you can't have that.
Isn't that funny?
The extreme example of this was McLean Bible Church.
And that's where we're going next. Go for it.
The idea that, the pastor can't pray for the president without having to explain himself and apologize or something is just ridiculous. The Bible specifically commands us to pray for our leaders, and we've done that. And, again, just the hypocrisy. This is the thing that drives me crazy. Look, people can dislike Trump, and he's certainly almost a caricature. He's so unusual. But the hypocrisy of how we do things differently. No, but I can't imagine anybody ever complaining that some pastor was praying for the president when Obama was president, or even Bush or anybody else. But somehow now that it's Trump, how dare you pray for the president when it biblically requires you to do so? I just thought that was just bizarre. And I, again, one of the reasons why I'm not a pastor. If I was the pastor, my response to those people would not have been like his.
Yes.
My response would be, what is wrong with you? What is in your heart that's causing you to want to violate Scripture and to criticize people who are following Scripture? That's what should have been the response from the pastor, but I just thought that was so ridiculous.
One of the things that's interesting, you and I passed back and forth the Patriot Post, and they had a quote in there from an atheist who said, look, I'm one of those atheist, unfrozen Neanderthal atheist types. But even the atheist was saying, what is wrong with these individuals? You would think that you would pray for a unregenerate individual, because he obviously doesn't like Trump. Okay, that's fine. But he just goes on to say, isn't that what you're supposed to do? And he was like, what is wrong? When the atheists are wanting to know what's wrong with other Christians, you got a problem, right, Penna?
It was interesting. Like a week ago, we were talking about Franklin Graham calling for Sunday to be a day of prayer for the president. And why? And he's under attack and all of that. And so a lot of people just came out of the woodwork and said, well, you're giving him cover for his immoral past, or, you're supporting him by praying for him, that you are giving him legitimacy when we opposed him as Christians and, all the never Trumpers. So you had all that. And it was so interesting, I thought, because then he walks in a church, McLean Bible, unannounced. They didn't even know he was coming until like minutes when he was on the way. This pastor, David Platt, gave a prayer that, when you really listen to the content of his prayer, he was praying for things that if you hate Trump, you wish Trump were more like this. He's praying for grace. He's praying for wisdom. He's praying for his family. He's praying for all kinds of things that we want to see in this president that some people don't think exist in him. So, you're going to critique him for that and saying he's giving him cover. It was such an unpolitical prayer that I don't think I don't see how it could have been less political. But, anybody, I guess pastors are just out there. They are like targets.
Well,
in this culture.
When that scripture was originally, written, who was the leader?
Caesar.
I mean,
Nero. Yeah.
Who's burning Christians on fire, and you're supposed to pray for him. But, Donald Trump's worse than Nero. I mean, this is how, it makes your head want to explode. I mean, it's just, it really is crazy that people, it's like that distortion, that Donald Trump distortion deal where the Bible goes out the window, everything you believe goes out the window if you just happen to just hate this guy. And to me, it's like these things are like a Rorschach test where is there something wrong with you? Do you have bitterness in your heart? Are you so warped that you can't even see straight whenever you hear about this guy? This is an example of that. Oh, I can't believe this pastor prayed for the president and for the vice president and for the Congress. That's what we're supposed to do as Christians.
Love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. You have a problem with praying for the president or any of the reaction? We'd love to hear from you. We'll be right back.
In a slow moment at Starbucks, one of my favorite young baristas chatted about how she and her boyfriend divide the cooking duties. She also mentioned they recently moved here from halfway across the country. Her revelations made me think about how much has changed due to the sexual revolution. Activities and events that used to take place within marriage now often happen outside of it. In addition to sex and intimacy, unmarried couples share residences, cooking, bill paying, childbirth and child rearing, and really life and career planning. And I wondered if this lovely barista would like to be married to this boyfriend of a few years. Maybe not, but her situation is illustrative of a sea change in the culture. University of Texas sociologist Mark Regnerus writes of this phenomenon in Cheap Sex, The Transformation of Men, Marriage, and Monogamy. He conducted over 100 interviews and drew on data from his survey of over 15,000 Americans to back up what we all know. Cheap sex is flooding the market in sex and relationships, and it's resulting in a disturbing decline in the marriage rate. His extensive research has shown that among Americans ages 24 to 32, casual sex is the norm, and waiting until marriage is rare. Cheap sex has become a presumption widely perceived as natural and commonsensical, he writes. The development and widespread use of the birth control pills serve to separate sex from childbearing. A weaker tie between sex and pregnancy detracts from the argument that marriage is necessary for sex. Thus, women lose some of their gatekeeping power. No-string sex might be fun for men, but as Dr. Regnerus points out, it does little to encourage them toward those historic institutions, a settled job, and marriage that created opportunity for them and their families. Mark Regnerus' book makes a good case that cheap sex is actually very expensive for women, men, and the society. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just, as a program note, also mention that just now, if you happen to be listening on the computer, we'll, of course, hear the commentaries by Penna Dexter. This one is entitled Cheap Sex, which is actually the title of a book by a professor, University of Texas, a sociologist, Mark Regnerus, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But I thought since we did raise the question about whether or not to pray for the president, you mind I take a phone call or two? And we'll see if we can pick one. Let's go to South Carolina, WGAP. Gail, what would you say on this particular issue?
You know, I say I prayed for President Obama. I prayed for President Bush. Donald Trump is no different. Why even Christians get so upset, and start hearing things about this man that they don't even know. It's only what they've heard. Gretchen, he's not what we would like to see as a Christian, but God can use anyone. And I do believe that God has placed this man in his position for such a time as this. He's doing more for Christians than any president I can remember has ever done. And so for that, I applaud it. And I'm going to continue to pray for him. That's what the Word of God tells us.
That's right.
That we have to pray for our leaders.
1 Timothy 2, and like you said, maybe God has raised up a Donald Trump for a time such as this. A couple of years ago, I don't think anybody around the table would have said, oh, yeah, this would be our first choice. And I don't think Kelly, even as we got closer to the election, thought, well, I don't know. But then he said, here's the list of the people I would put on the Supreme Court. And I saw all of us around the table saying, I've never seen anybody else put out a list like that before. And then when I began to see who was putting the list together, I felt even better, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're way past that now. We've got 2 years of actually appointing people, and most of those people who are being appointed to all those judgeships are people who could sit next to you in your pew. These are really solid people with great judicial and legal backgrounds, very bright, and who are, going to follow, they're going to do their job. They're going to actually follow the Constitution and statutes rather than try to treat it like a political office. I mean, it's very different what's going on and the quality of judges we are getting on the bench. We're setting the courts right now for the next, 30, 40 years. And 85 in the first 2 years, but, I mean, I think we're on our way to maybe 150 the second 2 years. And so we're talking about a huge sea change in the future with high quality judges, many of whom are solid believers.
The other part of the expression of the Christian faith, in a sense, and principles in Donald Trump is that all these reversals of Obama policies are coming out of HHS and other departments of the government. For instance, this week there was one pulling federal contracts on research using human fetal tissue.
Yes.
So, this is, obviously the Christians that are in government, they are advising, there's a lot of them in HHS. And so they're helping. You can't get anything like that through Congress right now, but he can reverse policies that have to do with Obamacare or that have to do with federal funding of different things. So that's coming through. And it was, one other thing I wanted to mention about David Platt's prayer for the president is there were lots of parts of that prayer that struck me as, praying for the president to come to faith. Not, a lot of people say, well, all these Christian leaders assume that he's a Christian and they're giving him cover and he's not acting like a Christian. But I haven't not heard one of them. Well, I've heard a few of them say they think he's a Christian. But, only God knows, first of all. But this prayer sounded like he was praying for him to come to faith. Mm-hmm. And Platt actually said later in an interview, he said, I think he said this to his congregation, in the end, would you pray with me for gospel seed that was sown today to bear fruit in the president's heart?
Great line. Great line. We love David Platt, and I'm glad that we had a chance to talk about him. Let's take some more phone calls. We got quite a few here. And this one in California, KYCC, I think you want to go back to this issue of social media. So, Charlie, what would you like to share with us?
Well, I just wondered how long you thought it might be before someone rises up and takes the place of Facebook, much like Fox News came up and rivaled CNN and then ended up dominating the market in the news media. So I just kind of want to hear what your take is on that.
And I've heard various people address that. As a matter of fact, David French, in one of his pieces that came out yesterday, kind of addressed that there may be something like that. The difficulty is most people want to go where the people already are, and they're already there on Facebook. And there is just a very significant problem with momentum to create that alternative. And although I've seen people try to create those alternatives, just haven't seen them bear fruit right yet.
It depends on what you want to do. If you want to influence people, the culture, you do have to go where the people are.
Yes.
If you want to just have something that's more a social media for believers or for conservatives to interact among themselves, then something might grow up for that purpose. But it would never be a Facebook or a Twitter or a YouTube. It couldn't be that because you wouldn't have the secular world using it.
Yeah, and again, that's part of the issue. Let's take another phone call real quickly before we take a break. Oklahoma, KJDR. Jim, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes, a couple of things. First, when you're talking about Tiananmen Square, I was in Chengdu, Sichuan province, about 6 months after Tiananmen Square, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that, boy, the Chinese government really came down with both feet heavy on the Christian church there in China, blaming them for Tiananmen Square, and actually some severe persecution. Second thing was I travel down to Central America quite often. I've been down there a couple of times in the last couple of months, and I talk to people. That's one reason I travel. Ran into a German couple in Playa del Carmen, Mexico, and he broached a subject. He said, what do you feel about President Trump? And I said, he's probably the best thing that's happened to us in a long time. And he said, I don't understand it. The European press and the European governments are hateful, terribly hateful about President Trump. And he says, I like him, and he's this guy about, probably 25 years old, 30 maybe at the most. And I said, what do you base that on? He said, well, his track record, man, he's doing what we need to do. We need to come down hard on these Muslims taking over our country and stuff like this. So those two things just fit in kind of what you guys have been bringing up this morning. I just thought I'd bring those up.
Well, appreciate you bringing those up. And I know I have a number of other phone calls, but we have a break that we need to go to. So, Penna, when we come back, we do want to spend some time talking about your commentary as well as a couple of other issues. And I thought we'd also get into the fact that if the trend continues, we're going to have probably 1 million illegal immigrants. So we have as many illegal immigrants coming in this country as legal. So we wanted to get into that. And even earlier in the week, we spent a little bit of time talking about Justice Clarence Thomas, talking about this issue of abortion and the connection to eugenics. And so those are some important issues. And most importantly, we want to talk with Kelly Shackelford because this case before the Supreme Court could change everything. And so we want to certainly mobilize prayer for that. So those are all issues we want to put on the table, so take the time to visit our website today. You'll find some of the articles we've been talking about here today, and if you would like to know a little bit more about Point of View or First Liberty, those links are available to you, and I hope that as we come to the end of our fiscal year, June 30th, we would certainly hear from you, because if you appreciate some of the conversation that takes place here every single day, we certainly could use your financial support, especially as we head into the summer, which tend to be more lean months for us financially. So if you can help us out, that would be appreciated. Click the button that says Donate Now. Might even join with the Truth Team. For as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, you can support this ministry, and that is available on the website as well. We'll take a break, and we'll take some more phone calls right after this.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, and if you're just joining us, I might just mention last hour we spent a fair amount of time talking about everything from D-Day to Tiananmen Square, certainly focused on the subject of social media, as well as the question that we're going to get to in just a second, the whole question of whether or not David Platt's prayer for the president was appropriate. So let me take that phone call first. Penna, Dexter, Kelly Shackelford in studio with us. That's Weekend Edition. And if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to New Hampshire. And Craig, I think you want to speak to this issue of the prayer for the president. What's your thoughts?
My thoughts first are I agree with the praying for President Trump, but I wanted to share what I thought the explanation for why people criticized the praying for the president.
Sure.
And, I believe it was because they thought it was a violation of the First Amendment. However, I believe it wasn't a violation of the First Amendment because it was a gift without any blackmail or anything looking for anything in return. And it had no influence on any laws that may be created. So that's just my thoughts.
Okay. Well, and again, first of all, the First Amendment gives you the freedom to pray or not to pray, and it's the free exercise of religion, and it's certainly not the establishment of religion or anything like that, Kelly, right?
Yeah. I mean, somebody could try to say it's a violation of the IRS regs, the Johnson Amendment, but it's not. You can pray for any president, any Congress, any person you want. There's nothing wrong with that.
You know, and the point I might just make is we do this as we get closer to election. But Kelly, the piece that is available at First Liberty helps you understand that if your church wants to, for example, pass out voter guides, that's appropriate. If you want to have individuals pray for individuals, you can invite both candidates, and if one of the candidates shows up and the other does not, you were fair enough to do so. Mm-hmm. So actually, there's a lot more freedom than most pastors would want to exercise. There are no government regulations other than, as you said, the most extreme situation, which I've never seen, in which a church would endorse a candidate.
Right. It's all about the 501c3 entity in the first place, which, the pastor, the individuals at the church, the pastor can be the campaign chairman for somebody if they want to be. They're an American. They have freedom.
That's right.
It's just the 501c3 entity, the nonprofit entity that can't endorse or give money, resources to one candidate over another. Again, I've never seen any churches that wanted to do those two things. They want to talk about the issues biblically. They want to make sure people register to vote. They want to make sure people get nonpartisan voters guides. There's a lot of times the candidates will go and speak at the church, and as long as the church opens that up to all the candidates in that race, they've done what they can. And I always say, hey, great, invite them all, and then let the congregation ask them questions.
Yeah,
and you'll find out the people who believe the right things and not, because probably the other side probably won't show up if they don't want to be biblical.
Yeah, so again, just a couple of ways to educate you about that. And since it was in the news, I wanted to get your thoughts about this. I think our fourth article here is one that comes from the Washington Examiner, because it sets up to the conversation we're going to have with our next caller. And that is, Penna, as we've been looking at this, We keep hearing from not only some of the Democratic candidates running for the presidency, but even from the mainstream media that there's no crisis at the border. I don't know how you could say that with a straight face, given the fact that, according to this article, if the trend continues, we will have 1 million illegal immigrants that will have crossed the border. That is comparable to the number of people we've allowed to come in legally. And when you talk about the fact that those individuals show up for a hearing, are supposed to show up for a hearing, they come in, they say, okay, you're supposed to show up on this date for a hearing. The information that we have from people that have been working in this field say that anywhere from 85% to almost 90% of those individuals never show up for a hearing. We're just allowing people to come into this country, and we're not vetting them, and we don't know why they're here. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they're going, and we don't know what they actually want to do once they are here in this country.
Well, the article is, the news peg for it is, I guess, 144,000 apprehensions by U.S. Customs and Border Protection in May.
In May.
Yeah, it was up 99% over this time last year. So they had to revise their predictions for the year, and it took it up over 1 million.
Yes.
And so, you just look at the chart. I mean, they've gone to say that there's no crisis. I mean, how do you handle all these people? First of all, we have to let a lot of them go, and they go into the country.
Yeah. Catch and release.
Sometimes you never hear from them again.
Don't even know
because
who
we
they
aren't
are, where
we
they're
aren't
going.
equipped for this. I mean, they're talking about some big changes, but it takes time, energy, and money, which the Congress won't appropriate.
Yes. So our next caller wants to address that, so let's give you that opportunity. We'll go to South Carolina, WLPG. Brian, thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Kerby. Thank you for taking my call. Good to hear from you again. I'm calling about the number of illegals crossing the border. I served 12 or 14 years ago with the Texas Border Volunteers, and the number we typically got back from the border guards, the CBP, Customs and Border Protection, MIGRA, was that they estimated that 1 out of 5 illegal aliens was apprehended. And if that is the case, then this 144,000, which that goes to 1 million a year, because most of the months are shorter than May or June or July, which are high traffic months. That would indicate that there are really 5 million crossing during the year.
Quite possibly. Yeah.
And
I've always thought the numbers that we get from the individuals, where they say there's only 11 million people here illegally, I don't believe that number.
Well, more people are going to get across without a wall than with a wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if someone wants to ask me what impact that's going to have on the 2020 elections, I would say to them, I have no idea. Do you think that I have 2020 vision?
Mm-hmm. No, but again, it's not going to be positive, is it? And of course, just in terms of the stress on the infrastructure, on the schools, on the hospitals, and just, again, I'm not saying that every person that comes across the border or overstays their visa, since a high percentage of them are obviously here illegally because of overstaying their visa, are individuals that mean harm to America, but you know that a percentage of them probably do. And when you just simply don't know, this is one of those issues which I think is so frustrating, Penna, because we feel like both sides don't really want to address the issue very much. Democrats see these as potential voters. Republicans, oftentimes influenced by the Chamber of Commerce, see these as individuals that are going to give you cheap labor. And that's why we have the crisis that has been taking place ever since Ronald Reagan granted amnesty back, in 1986?
We'll have to discuss this after the break, but the House showed that they really don't want to address it because it's totally ignoring that issue. They went ahead and passed something that would basically give amnesty to 2.5 million people that are already in the country illegally.
Let's come back and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, if I were to ask you which professions have high suicide rates, you would probably mention military veterans suffering from PTSD. In their latest report, the Centers for Disease Control have found that the suicide rate for young male military veterans is higher than previously thought, but they found that it is lower in some states than the suicide rate for farmers. The high suicide rate for farmers is only now just beginning to get media attention. Mike Rossman is a psychologist who has been studying this issue for decades and has an appreciation for the stresses on farmers since he is also an Iowa farmer. Writing in the journal Behavioral Healthcare, he reminds us that farming has always been a stressful occupation because many of the factors that affect agricultural production are largely beyond the control of the producers. This is borne out by the latest statistics from the CDC. If you focus on all the people working in agriculture, farmers, farm laborers, ranchers, fishers, and lumber harvesters, they take their lives at a rate higher than any other occupation. The suicide rate for agricultural workers in 17 states is nearly 5 times higher compared to that of the general population. The reasons for this are many. Farmers are often reluctant to seek help. Often their farms are far away from healthcare centers. Pesticide exposure can lead to depression. They are isolated, and the cost of feed and equipment continues to rise while the prices they receive for food and fiber remain stagnant. This is a healthcare crisis that deserves attention. Perhaps this is the first time you've even heard about the suicide rate of farmers. Making citizens and politicians aware of this crisis is the first step. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, and we're going to get into a couple of other issues. But, Penna, of course, we had one of those breaks that come from time to time. I wanted to get some of your comments here. This whole issue of immigration is an issue that certainly was something that we thought back in the 1980s might be addressed, because the argument was, let's provide amnesty, let's actually control the border, and that was the promise. Well, amnesty happened, but no border control is taking place. And there is this constant drumbeat that says we need comprehensive immigration reform. But as I've said before you get to that point, you have to control your border. If you don't like the analogy, come up with a better one. But when we've had a water break in the house, the first thing you do is turn off the water. You don't try to mop it up while it's leaking. And the same kind of idea when you have 1 million plus, and I agree with Brian, it probably could be millions of people crossing the border illegally. And then people say, well, then let's have comprehensive immigration reform. You've got to control the border first, don't you?
You do. And, right now, the pro-immigration lobby has the argument that we need people to fill jobs. But really, to do it right, we need to be able to control who comes in. We need to bring in the type of people that can do the jobs that we need done.
Right.
We need to know who they are. They need to have some sort of a legal status, and that means they have to meet certain requirements. And, we can do all of this. It's not impossible, but we don't have the political will to do it. Instead, the House comes in and passes something to take the Dreamers, which, in a sense, there is probably, it's necessary to do something for the people who were brought here by their parents, and that they have stayed and they've gone to school and they've done things. But this is not that. because this just is such a blanket amnesty. It doesn't control, again, who the people are. Are they criminals? Do they have a criminal record? And so, it's just, we're at a stalemate. The left and the right, or the two sides of it, won't come together to do what's necessary. And I think, in one sense, one side has tried to compromise. I mean, President Trump, for instance, has said, yes, he would like to legalize the Dreamers, but we have to have a wall. And they're having none of that.
That was a deal breaker.
Yeah, that was a deal breaker.
Yeah.
So,
Well, at least for some. Well, it shouldn't be.
Look, I'll be honest. I mean, the immigration issue has not been like a top issue for me in the past, and but it should be for everybody at this point. I mean, it's just everybody knows it's completely out of control, and I agree with Penna that neither party seems to really be serious about trying to fix it. I really only think there's one person who's really serious about it, and it's President Trump. So this is one of those areas where I think he's really been a leader on the issue, trying to do something about it before even people realized how bad the problem was. I just don't know the solution. I think what he is trying to do with Mexico, he's very creative. I'll give him that.
Well, that's
I mean,
for sure.
He's been. It's like
graduated tariffs. We talked about it earlier in the week, but talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, he's said, look, I mean, he's tried everything, right? He's tried about everything he can. I feel like that he's kind of got his arms, his legs tied behind his back, his mouth almost taped shut, and yet he's still figuring out a way. He's like, aha, well, they have to come through Mexico, and so what I can do is say, Mexico, you're part of the problem because you're sending all these people to our border. What 130,000 last month, I think, and therefore we're going to start raising tariffs on you until you control the chaos you're creating at our border. They were at the table within 24 hours. They were at the table sitting down to negotiate. So maybe it'll work. I don't know. But, I mean, the real answer, like Penna says, is really for Congress to do its job. And it's really sad. This is one of those times where, a democracy or a democratic republic is failing. Yes. I mean, if this was any business or any organization, you would force everybody into a room and you would say, fix the problem. I don't care if it's perfect or not. Come up with an answer. What's our system? What are we going to do about this? They won't do this because they're all children. And nobody gets penalized because one side has extreme people supporting them and the other side has the opposite end of the issue. And so nobody will sit down and do anything. And this is sad. But the Democrats don't want to fix this because they think this is a good issue for them. You'd say, oh, that's just really cynical. Well, look, the Democrats had the presidency and the Senate and the House under Obama. Did they fix the issue? No, they didn't fix the issue. So the problem is neither party is there's only one person trying, and he can't do it by himself, or I don't think he can. He's trying to do it by himself. So, we really need prayer because this is important. You're not a country if you can't control your borders and know who's coming in and coming out.
One other question I want to put to you, Kelly, and that is, I get this question every once in a while, and it has to do with Donald Trump saying, okay, let's just take the money from the Defense Department. And then there's a judge that says you can't do that. Or, oh, here is a way that we can maybe limit individuals that can come to this country from certain countries, which are ones that don't have control over their citizenship. And a judge in Hawaii says you can't. And the question that keeps surfacing from our listeners with a level of frustration every time I get it is, how can one judge in San Francisco, one federal judge in Hawaii, stop the president of the United States doing his job?
Well,
can you speak to that?
I think one judge should be able to, in that jurisdiction alone. What's wrong is they're doing what's called nationwide injunctions, and I think that's going to come to an end because I think that's an abuse of power, and it's something that doesn't really work. And, it leads to what's happening, which is they go into liberal places and they file the lawsuit to get a liberal judge who will then enjoin the president, who then, while they're appealing up to get to a normal court, you've got an injunction that's applying for the whole country. And that doesn't make any sense. But look, if the president or any government official is violating the Constitution, really
Sure.
violating the Constitution,
Understand that, yeah.
they should be able to, whoever's bringing the lawsuit, those individuals should be able to get that stopped as to whoever the plaintiffs are. But it's a totally different thing to say, I'm going to bring the lawsuit, but I want this person enjoined to everybody in the country. They're not all here as plaintiffs, okay?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, a lot of them would disagree with you. So that is where they're going too far. This is off subject, but I will say something that's kind of interesting that most people don't know, which is, of course, these lawsuits are almost always being filed in the Ninth Circuit.
Right.
Which, Rush Limbaugh calls the Ninth Circus.
Yeah.
It's in San Francisco. It's the most liberal federal court of appeals in the country. What people don't realize is because President Trump has been so diligent in appointing these conservative judges to the courts of appeals and the district court for life, if there's two more up for the Ninth Circuit that need to be confirmed, and again, they should go through, absent anything shocking. When they go through, it'll be 16 to 13, liberal to conservative on the Ninth Circuit, which means just changing 2 more seats out of the 29 will flip the Ninth Circuit.
Isn't that amazing?
To a conservative court of appeals.
Has it ever been?
No.
I can't think of it. I grew up. Two of us grew up in California,
now,
so we can't
I
remember
know a lot of these western states, they're all in their chairs cheering right now because if you're in Wyoming or all these states are being dominated by California. Yeah. The circuit really is too big. It should be split.
Yep.
It's double the size of all the other circuits, but the result of that is California kind of controls all these other more conservative western states, which is really wrong. Literally, if people want to see what does it matter who your president is and who they're appointing and what the Senate is and who they're confirming on these judgeships for life, the fact that the Ninth Circuit is 2 seats away from flipping to a conservative circuit should be, a little bit of an image for this is pretty significant what's going on with the judges and not just the Supreme Court, but the lower courts as well.
It's amazing this has happened because it's certainly not for the lack of the left trying to shut down some of these appointments, especially to the Ninth Circuit.
And I'll point out, we have an article on this today at First Liberty where we talk about the circuits. We were looking at this, I know, off air.
Yeah,
we talk about
find it right now.
The circuits that are about to flip, and there's 3 of them that are moving up to flipping. We've already had some already, so it does make a difference in who the president is, who the Senate is with regard to the judges, and whether you have a conservative courts or liberal courts. And people don't understand these phrases a lot. Liberal means sort of judges that think that the Constitution is a written but breathing document where they can sort of bring in what they want. Conservative doesn't mean they're bringing in conservative results. They just believe they should follow whatever the words say. Whatever the Constitution says, whatever the statute says, my job's not to change it or do what I think is right. My job is just to follow that original understanding.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Penna Dexter's commentary as something we're going to be addressing, and a couple of other issues. We'll also be sending you to First Liberty to find some of the information we're talking about. All that coming up right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. We'll take some more phone calls in just a minute. 1-800-351-1212. But if you're just listening a minute ago, we were talking about how some of these appellate courts could actually change. Penna, you can give us some of the facts and figures. I just gave a link to our people. Maybe they can post it. But in the interim, simply go to First Liberty, go to the news section. It's the second article that says more flips in the future. Find out which 3 appellate courts the Trump administration could flip. This is incredible news, Penna. It just shows you the remarkable change that has taken place over the last almost 2 years with all those individuals that Kelly's been talking about. And so we talked about the Ninth Circuit Court, but it's also the Second Circuit Court and the 11th Circuit Court. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, first of all, I will say First Liberty does a lot of good work, but they also, they're in the business of also sort of educating people about these issues. I mean, Kelly does Point of View and does that well. But there's some good writers there, and they post these articles. And if you are a supporter, you get them in your email every week, or if you ask for it, I guess. And so this one was, I did not know this until today. But, the Senate has confirmed 112 federal judges, including 41 to the U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeals under Trump. And this is the court.
And sets a record, by the way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
This hasn't been seen on the Circuit Courts of Appeals in over 60 years.
Yes.
Under Nixon was the last time there were this many, or even close. But this, those are the courts of appeals, in case people don't know, just under the Supreme Court. So
where a lot of decisions are made, right?
Yes.
A lot
only
don't
80
go
cases,
past that.
Yeah, they'll go to the court. Yeah, Supreme Court.
So as of May of this year, 41 appellate court judges have been confirmed, a number that far exceeds the prior record of 25 held by Nixon. And so, yes, the 11th Circuit is one vacancy away from a flip. Right now it's 6-6. And that, where's the 11th Circuit, Kelly?
It's basically, Georgia and that area of the country. The 11th
so
Circuit.
to the south. So
Yes.
you can sort of see that. But then you look at the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. That's more in the north.
That's New
northeast.
York and that area.
So that's right now the conservative, appointed by a conservative, appointed by a liberal ratio is 6-7.
Yes.
So that could flip. And that's in the Northeast, amazingly.
Yeah.
And then, as we mentioned, the Ninth Circuit is now liberal to conservative 16-11, but there's some sitting there waiting for confirmation,
That's right.
and they are appointed by Trump.
Right. It'll be 16-13 when they're through. And so all it takes is 2. And there's a number of the liberals on the Ninth Circuit that are, I think there's 6 or 7, maybe. I don't know how many. It's a lot.
This article says 8.
8. Okay.
8
that
liberal
are,
appointed judges eligible to retire.
And eligible to retire means the way it works as a federal judge is once you hit 65, or there's a combination of service plus years, but basically it's when you're age 65, you get paid your salary the rest of your life, whether you work or not. Now, so that what that means is if you're a judge.
Or to turn that down.
Yeah, if you're a judge, you can leave and you can go work at a law firm and get paid, and you get paid your other salary. So if you continue to just be a judge, you're doing so basically for free.
Mm-hmm.
And so most judges at that point go, I think I'm going to go do something additional.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a nice way to, these are judges appointed for life.
Yes,
and you don't want them to be there for 40 years and stay on to where they can't hear, they don't understand anything anybody's talking about. So this is sort of the nice way to encourage them to move on. And so think about that. If just 2 of those judges on the Ninth Circuit say, it's time for me to do my next thing, and Trump is replacing them, the Ninth Circuit will flip to conservative.
That is just incredible news. So again, that's available on the website, and one of the reasons to go to firstliberty.org, click on the news section. It's the second article. We'll try to have a link there as well. So just wanted to educate you on that issue. Let me take a phone call real quickly, and then I want to get into Penna Dexter's commentary here. Edwin in Arizona, you've been waiting a while. KNLB, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, there's so much there to talk about. But very quickly, Tiananmen Square, the difference between them as America, if every citizen had a gun, they could take their country back. During World War II, the Japanese didn't attack because they knew there were 2 million hunting rifles waiting for them. And then into the immigration.
Yes.
I think we need to take care of our veterans and our citizens before we do anything about illegal aliens.
Well said.
But
well
we're
said.
being forced.
Yeah, being forced to do that
we
because
already have
of
to
crisis.
supply health care and education.
I understand that.
Well, Edwin, I appreciate you calling, and we've got a lot to cover in the last half hour here, and one of those things is Penna Dexter. I want to get your commentary, and by the way, I just might mention that if you would like to receive Penna Dexter's commentary, you could even sign up to receive it in your inbox. It will come to you tomorrow. And, of course, we will play that in about 4 minutes when we go to a break for those of you listening on the computer. But you were really bringing us some great information from one of these individuals at the University of Texas, Mark Regnerus. Tell us more.
Well, it's great information, but it's really common sense. We have to remind people of common sense these days, though. And this one is because I have this coffee habit, I go to Starbucks most days, and I kind of get to know the people there. And so, a lot of them are young. A lot of them are not exactly going to church. And,
yes.
So they think a little differently than I and my family do. And so I just kind of listen to them. I want to see what the culture is like. I want to see what they're talking about. And so there's one barista there who's just precious. I really like her a lot, but she chit-chats about her boyfriend and her who have been together a long, long time. So, and they've even moved here from back east. So, they're living together. And she talked about what they make for dinner. And so it just occurred to me, wow, all these things that married couples do, people that aren't married do now. And then I'm reading and I see an article about a new book that was written by Mark Regnerus. He's a University of Texas sociologist, and he does big studies, demographic studies, and he did one which he put in this new book that he wrote called Cheap Sex, The Transformation of Men, Marriage, and Monogamy. He studied over 15,000 Americans, and then he also did 100 interviews to kind of write this book. And he says, quote, cheap sex is flooding the market in sex and relationships. And he says that what's happening because of that is a decline in the marriage rate. We all know this. It's been reported everywhere. He says that among Americans aged 24 to 32, casual sex is the norm and waiting until marriage is rare. We know that. The sad thing is about it that it hurts all sectors. It hurts women, of course, we know, because they lose their gatekeeping power because, the pill has been here for decades now. It's separated procreation from the sexual act. And so, they don't really have as much of a leg to stand on if they want to stay pure until marriage. For men, it sounds fun, but it's not good for men. It hasn't been good for men at all because marriage pushes them towards other things like a job and successful life and taking care of a family. And, my husband, who's employed young men over the years and seen them as they get married, become much better employees, more successful and wealthier. Mm-hmm. It's just the way society works. So men aren't doing as well. And of course the culture, because of we're losing out on marriage, we're not doing as well. So, my conclusion to this is Mark Regnerus's book makes a good case that cheap sex is actually very expensive for women, men, and the society. Well, this is all common sense, but I wrote it. This was my commentary this week.
And again, if you are not already receiving the commentaries, My Viewpoints commentary comes out Monday through Friday. We put it in your inbox. Penna's always is one that we run, and you'll be able to hear it in about a minute from now if you're on your computer, and that one will come into your inbox on Saturday. So let me encourage you, as you go to the website there, you can, first of all, see any one of those Viewpoints commentaries and just click on the picture there that says Cheap Sex, and that will take you to that one. Or if you say, I'd like to see some of your previous commentaries that have actually come out. We talked earlier in the week about the importance of intact families. You can click on there, but most importantly, there is a place for you to sign up, and I would encourage you to do so. So that's all available to you on the website, and it's just one of the other reasons why I think you should support Point of View in the month of June as we come to the end of our fiscal year. But when we come back, I want to focus some time and attention on Kelly Shackelford, because June is when the really big cases come down from the Supreme Court, and we are going to certainly feature what happens in the Bladensburg case, but I want him to try to explain again what that means in terms of the possibility that it would change this whole issue of religious liberty and make his job a whole lot easier. So that's what we're going to come back and talk about. We have a link to First Liberty, and if you haven't already gone to find that piece on the various changes that are going to take place in the circuit courts. I would encourage you to do so. But also, when you go there, you're going to see something that we'll be talking about in terms of some remarkable changes that took place this year. He calls it the biggest 30. So we'll talk about some of those right after this.
In a slow moment at Starbucks, one of my favorite young baristas chatted about how she and her boyfriend divide the cooking duties. She also mentioned they recently moved here from halfway across the country. Her revelations made me think about how much has changed due to the sexual revolution. Activities and events that used to take place within marriage now often happen outside of it. In addition to sex and intimacy, unmarried couples share residences, cooking, bill paying, childbirth and child rearing, and really life and career planning. And I wondered if this lovely barista would like to be married to this boyfriend of a few years. Maybe not, but her situation is illustrative of a sea change in the culture. University of Texas sociologist Mark Regnerus writes of this phenomenon in Cheap Sex, The Transformation of Men, Marriage, and Monogamy. He conducted over 100 interviews and drew on data from his survey of over 15,000 Americans to back up what we all know. Cheap sex is flooding the market in sex and relationships, and it's resulting in a disturbing decline in the marriage rate. His extensive research has shown that among Americans ages 24 to 32, casual sex is the norm, and waiting until marriage is rare. Cheap sex has become a presumption widely perceived as natural and commonsensical, he writes. The development and widespread use of the birth control pills serve to separate sex from childbearing. A weaker tie between sex and pregnancy detracts from the argument that marriage is necessary for sex. Thus, women lose some of their gatekeeping power. No-string sex might be fun for men, but as Dr. Regnerus points out, it does little to encourage them toward those historic institutions, a settled job, and marriage that created opportunity for them and their families. Mark Regnerus' book makes a good case that cheap sex is actually very expensive for women, men, and the society. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
You know, if you've been listening to Point of View any length of time, you have heard Kelly say more than once that this decision coming down from the Supreme Court could be a lot more than just a decision about the cross. It could change everything. Of course, I was at a luncheon where you explained that in some detail, and I think you've tried to explain it here, but I think for one more time, let's come back and talk about how significant this case of Bladensburg is and how that could change your life and the whole issue of religious liberty for decades from now.
For people, again, I think most people know this is a cross that is a veterans memorial that was put up almost 100 years ago by mothers who lost their sons in World War I, and there's 49 young men's name on that cross on the bottom that died from that county. And now there's a lawsuit to have it torn down after 100 years because it's on government property, because they built roads around it and they had to take over the land and all that. And so ultimately, you know, people immediately see this is about veterans memorials, because if they tear down this one, Arlington National Cemetery is 2 miles away. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to go into Arlington and tear down the large freestanding crosses there. They'll have to come into your community, every community. So everybody sees the veterans memorials and what this means to them. But what people don't see is sort of the bigger picture. It's like, why are we even here? Like, what's wrong with a cross on government property? Well, nothing under the Constitution. But what happened is 50 years ago, there was a case called the Lemon case where, again, back in the 60s and early 70s, we had a very different, country where a lot of crazy liberal ideas, and they brought those into the Constitution as well. So they reinterpreted the Establishment Clause to say that things like separation of church and state and offended observers and all this comes in to where now all of a sudden the Establishment Clause, which we all know what that means, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. We didn't want there to be an established national church in the United States. So no establishment of a national church and no coercion of people to support some church. That's what they were after there. Well, it was reinterpreted in Lemon to mean, well, you can't have separation of church and state. And if somebody is walking through your community and they see a religious symbol and they're offended, then that's a violation. And it's like, what? That's not the Constitution. But that's what's led, if you have this strict separation, then everywhere government is, religion can't be. Well, government's everywhere. So you all of a sudden create the government almost being hostile to religion and sort of like a religious cleansing. And that's what's led to attacks on nativity scenes and menorahs around Hanukkah and Christmas. The Ten Commandments, veterans memorials with a cross or a Star of David. And so what we did in this case is we said to the Supreme Court, you should obviously uphold this memorial. This is ridiculous. But we shouldn't even be here. The only reason we're here is because of Lemon. And Lemon needs to go. It's created chaos. Nobody even knows how to interpret the test they made up. It's led to hostility from government, and it's created problems all over the country. We could go through case after case after case. And I'm pretty sure we had 5 justices agree with that during the oral argument. And so the question is, are those 5 going to hold? Because the more liberal justices were already in the oral argument realizing, oops, we're not going to be able to knock this cross down. So maybe we'll agree not to knock this one down as long as they don't touch Lemon. And so that's the agreement they're already trying to work out. Oh, don't you want a bipartisan kind of 7-2 opinion? I'm like, no, I want a 5-4 opinion because I want these attacks to stop. And so so I encourage people, there's incredible spiritual warfare, I'm sure, going on to the justices, because I just want you to think about what this would mean for our country. No more attacks on crosses or veterans memorials or nativity scenes or anything else. Those are over if we get this done. And the culture will change. Right, our whole lives, if religion comes in public, everybody kind of tenses up and wonders, is that okay?
Yes.
Is that because of the Constitution? No. It's because of the Lemon. If Lemon goes, from now on, religion in public's fine. Is the government establishing a national church? Are they coercing you with regard to your religion? No. Okay. That's fine. So the receptivity, the openness to the gospel, the ability of religion everywhere, I think our culture will change. So I really believe we're on the verge of every American having more religious freedom than they've ever had in their life, but that will depend upon this decision. And so it's going to come down within I think the 26th or 27th would be the very last day it could come down, probably the 24th. It could come down Monday. But we know between now and then, next couple of weeks, this is going to come down. So it's a great time to really be praying for the justices, to pray for God to do something great here, and we'll find out.
So I think earlier in the program we were talking about how things can happen at the last minute with these cases. So
Yes.
the prayer is so important now because there are conversations or like little trade-offs that can be done.
Yes.
This is the time that it would be happening, right?
That's what allegedly, again, nobody knows for sure, but this is allegedly what happened in the Obamacare case where Roberts, they were about to write a conservative opinion saying Obamacare was, the law was unconstitutional. And at the last second, last week, supposedly, week and a half, Roberts flipped and went with the liberals. And that's why you saw such a hostile response added to the end of the conservative dissent. So people can change. Whether that happened or not, it's the truth that they're trading, they're trying to convince, going back and forth. So this isn't until this thing is released. We don't know what we have, and we could have something that's a win for this memorial. I mean, we could have this is unconstitutional. I would be shocked by that because what it would mean for the country. And
oh boy,
yeah, most people think they're going to uphold it, but if they do, is it a win for this memorial alone? Or is this an end and a real change from 50 years of bad law on religious freedom to 50 years in the future of really good law on religious freedom?
One of the other questions I get from time to time is, what about those bakers in Oregon? I said, well, it's still in limbo, in part because the court decided not to decide yet, right?
They have deferred it 12 conferences now.
Aaron and Melissa Klein.
What that means is something is going on.
Something's going on.
And it could be that they're about to take the case. It could be that they're going to deny the case, but there's going to be a vigorous dissent. Or it could be that they're taking all this time because they've decided they're not going to take it, but they're just going to write a summary reversal. They're just going to say, this is wrong, and we're just going to write something and be done with it. Kind of like they did with Indiana, where they never heard an oral argument. They just said, we're going to deal with this abortion issue. We're pushing this part aside, and we're going to decide this and kind of all agree or mostly agree. So nobody knows. But the same thing as we're waiting for what happens in the Bladensburg Cross, the American Legion case, we're also waiting for what happens with Sweet Cakes and what they're doing, because they're doing something.
Yeah. All the more reason to pray. Right. Yeah. All the more reason to pray about that. Again, if you would like to know more about Kelly Shackelford and what he does, it's at firstliberty.org. We have the biggest 30, and that will be something. And also, they have a whole section on the biggest moments of impact for religious liberty. And I found those to be fascinating to read each one of those. Many of those people that you hear from, actually, you've been on this program with Kelly as well. So it's just another way for you to find out a little bit more. Kind of fun to have us all back together.
Yes, it's been fun.
It has been good. Well, we are out of time. Let me just mention again that I like to mention the fact that June is not only a time when some of these important cases come down from the Supreme Court, but it's when two of us sitting across the table have to make sure that the finances come in for our organization. So you should support First Liberty. I certainly do, and I encourage you to support Point of View. And your gift before the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, would be greatly appreciated. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. We're going to have a busy weekend, and we have a busy week next week. So join us then. All the information we've talked about today on our website, pointofview.net. We'll see you back here on Monday.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.